Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Colleen Milliard. I'm the Conversation Global Lead and the Executive Editor, and it's my immense pleasure to welcome you all to this 2024 edition of our flagship talks program here in Basel. It's a very special year for us, 2024, because this year we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of our conversation program here in Basel in their current form, which means that for 2 decades, thought leaders from across the world have gathered here on this very stage to discuss some of the most pressing issues of the day. These things are accepted now. We feel like it's normal for an art fair to have a talks program, but back then it wasn't at all the case. And Art Basel has to be credited for putting discourse back at the center of the marketplace and ensuring that an art fair is not just a great place to buy art, but also a great place to discuss art and to make sure that thought leadership can truly be nurtured. Over the last 2 decades, many people have been involved in the Conversations program, but none have had more of an impact than Ulrich Obrist. And indeed, to celebrate the incredible contribution that Hans did to our Conversation program, we just published an interview that was done 20 years ago with Albert Hofmann, the chemist, the Basel chemist, credited for synthesizing LSD for the first time. So this was a landmark moment 20 years ago. We're having more landmark moments to come, and please go and read it. It's a really absolute gold. I absolutely love it. Hans, I don't think we've ever really told you this in public, but on behalf of all of us at Art Basel, I just wanted to thank you for your generosity, for your time, for your ideas, for your contact, for always supporting all of us with our own ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
We really take none of this for granted. I'm really delighted that we are opening this special anniversary edition with a panel dedicated to a long-standing interest of yours and of many of us, utopias. So here we have dreaming utopias, building utopias. Oh God, what do we dream of? I'm getting nervous now. And I want us to continue to dream together. So thank you again. We're going to have 2 artists on this panel, Rebecca Allen, Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, and the architect, Carlo Ratti. Thank you all for being here. 2024 is also a very important year because we've welcomed a new conversation curator, Kimberly Bradley. Kimberly is a long-standing collaborator. She is a commissioning editor on our editorial platform. And I have to say that this collaboration has only furthered my admiration for her intellect, her curiosity, not to talk about her problem-solving skills. So thank you, Kim. Last, I want to thank you, Jess Davis-Molloy, who is our conversation program manager and has become a true backbone of this whole endeavor. So Jess, thank you. And finally, absolutely last but not least, I want to thank all of our speakers who I'm sure will make of this 2024 edition one to remember. So thank you, Hans, Rebecca, Danielle, Carlo. Thank you all for being here and enjoy the conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Thank you all for being here today. And thanks, of course, to our 3 amazing speakers, to Rebecca, to Danielle, and to Carlo. I want to also say a few thank yous. I'm incredibly grateful to Noah Horowitz, to Maike Kruse, to Kimberly Bradley, to Colleen Milliard, to Jess Davis-Molloy, and everybody here at Art Basel for this amazing collaboration. I'm also very grateful to Adel Köchlin, senior researcher, for the research on the panel, and I think we should give all of them a big round of applause. And when Kimberly and Colin and Jess started to actually conversations about this idea of the 20th anniversary of our Basel, and it has been an amazing journey because so many panels could evolve over a long time. We basically could work on certain topics, sometimes for 5, 7, 10 years, and revisit them. So it really is a long durational project of, in a way, production of knowledge. And when they were wondering, what could we do for the 20th anniversary, they had this idea that maybe we could somehow connect to Utopia Station, because that project which Rick Ratti and Maureen Nesbitt and I did also 20 years ago in the Biennale in Venice of Francesco Bonami was basically an exhibition really which looked at an experimental format, an exhibition which would always change, an exhibition which would start from this idea of utopia and also problematize it. It was basically starting from a conversation Theodor Adorno and Ernst Bloch had in 1964, where Adorno, being very skeptical of utopias and pointing out the dangers of utopias, kind of pushed Ernst Bloch to the wall to define, in a way, his position on utopia. And Bloch agreed and also countered that indeed the word utopia had been discredited, but that utopian thinking had not. Whatever utopia is, basically, Adorno said, whatever can be imagined as utopia has to do with a transformation as well. So they found common ground whilst disagreeing, and at the end, when really pushed against the wall to finally define what is utopia, Bloch kind of returned to Brecht and quoted Brecht, who had written that something is missing. So utopia being something is missing. So we're going to talk today about this idea, this problematic notion of utopia. We're going to talk about utopian thinking. We're going to also talk about what is missing, but we're going to, above all, talk about the amazing practice of our artists and architects present today, which have a lot to do with world building. We want to talk about world building. We're going to go from utopia to world building, and also how this all connects to technology, to video games as a way of world building in the 21st century. Particularly fascinating is, of course, the definition of utopia of Edouard Glissant, which is always the kind of definition I preferred, because Glissant, the Martinican writer and philosopher, my friend and mentor, he criticized the classical utopias like Plato's Republic and Thomas More's Utopia for being conceived as static systems. He designed a new alternative form of utopia consisting of continuous dialogue. He referred to utopia as a quivering or trembling utopia because, according to him, it transcends established systems of thought and subjects itself to the unknown. So I wanted to begin, actually, with the first question to our three amazing speakers. We have Rebecca Allen with us here. Please give Rebecca a big round of applause. We have Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley with us. A big round of applause. And we have Carlo Ratti with us. A big round of applause. Two amazing artists and an amazing architect. And maybe, Rebecca, we can begin with you. What is kind of your definition or approach to utopia, either positive or negative?
Yeah, it's a difficult thought for me because I don't think of utopia. Maybe I think in the early days when I started as an artist working with technology, I did dream of some utopia, but I've been involved in a lot of the invention of especially the visual parts of computers, and then eventually leading to things like games. And early on, everyone had such a utopian vision, like technology was going to enhance everything, enhance the human, enhance the world we live in. Of course, that hasn't totally worked out that way. So I'd like to, for me, utopia now is going back, like slowing down and thinking about really paying attention to the natural world we live in and our human body, which has been a theme of mine, virtual bodies, since the very beginning. But I feel like we're losing all that. We're, talking about entering the metaverse as if that would be some kind of utopia. But I can't imagine that it would be. It's all about removing ourselves from the physical world, our bodies and our physical places. So my dream of utopia is to not lose what we already have, to really slow down and think about where technology is taking us, and do we even want to go there? Because I think ultimately utopia might be like I had hoped 50 years ago when I started this, that it's about inventing things like technologies that's going to help with our thinking, our participation in the world, our relationships with people, and especially with nature and the world we live in.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Danielle?
Yeah, hi. So the first thing I actually want to try is this format is annoying me. So I just want everyone to say hi back, first of all. So I'm going to say hi, and you're all going to say... Let's try it again. I'm going to say hi, you're all going to say...
Hi!
Okay, fantastic. So one of the first things for me when I think about utopia is like the voice of everyone. And I think about the problem that I have a lot today is that often that we feel it's so hard to say something, to say anything, to say the wrong thing, to be cancelled or deleted because you said a thought that wasn't fully formed. And often we have these like panels or debates where the format is very much you listen to me, I do not listen to you. You're learning something from me, I'm not learning something from you. And in a utopia, maybe, if they can exist at all, that I need to understand that everyone here is also a resource. It cannot individually come from my mindset because my mindset is very small. And just like all of your mindsets are very small, even if you're very smart people, you have very small mindsets because you all live a very particular kind of life. And so for me, it's about knowing that each of us has a voice that needs to be listened to at a certain time, and also being able to construct an environment that allows you to share that voice. There's a reason all of you are silent right now and not saying, my thing of utopia is... Actually, let's just ask the question. Who has a quick, brief word what they think utopia is? Peace? Something that doesn't exist? Pardon? Your wish come true? Selfish. Anyone else? Dream? Nature? Harmony? Pollution? Pollution? Dilution. Love? More. Why is everyone so quiet? More. Freedom. You can talk over each other. No more borders. Keep going. Something that cannot exist. Depressing. Like, I feel that, one last thing, apologies, I know I'm taking up time, but is that often it feels that there's a lot of rules we have in our world. Some for really good reasons and some not so much, but it feels hard to disrupt those rules when we're kind of bound to follow them. We're so used to a kind of construct that we work in that when we try and break that rule, even now, it takes some time to say, I know you asked me to speak, but I still don't know if I'm allowed to say anything. And I think we need to try and build towards something that allows us to break that down and understand that these rules should not bind you, and by binding you, they can silence you and readily do. And so for me, that would be a way to slowly get towards the idea of utopia, but never really get there. So that's my spiel.
Thank you, Danielle. Carlo?
Yeah, I would say utopia is terrifying. Utopia is terrifying because if you look at the 20th century, utopia is what actually led us to a lot of totalitarian experiments. And Danielle, this morning we had a lot of great conversations, but you're saying all the voices that come together. That's the most scary thing you can imagine. So what I want to say is that the utopia, I think we need to have a different definition of utopia, perhaps like the great Italo Rota, who passed away a few months ago, used to say, is a utopia we can allow. Is a utopia that actually is not what is separate from the present, but utopia is just a tension, a vector that can help us to change our lives today. So I think that's a different thing. It's not utopia as a different, is an otherness. Is utopia is today and how we can improve where we are today.
Thank you so much. And actually, we wanted to think about utopia and the connection to world building, because we all have been thinking about world building a lot in conversations also for an exhibition which addressed the question of video games in art in the 21st century. And of course, both Rebecca and Danielle, you've been working a lot in that space. Rebecca for many, many decades, and Danielle also for so many years now. And basically, Rebecca has inspired generations of artists who today work with video games, working with video games at the moment when it was very difficult to do so. We had an interesting conversation because the idea was to bring together in Düsseldorf, at Julia Stoschek collection, many artists from all over the world who work with video games. We had an interesting conversation there about basically, initially, a lot of artists working with existing video games and making a form of détournement, appropriating them, turning them into the opposite, making a critique of them, something which today has become much, much more difficult because, as Jody explained, today it's more difficult to kind of crack the code of these video games because they're so protected. AAA games are very protected. It used to be much easier to just somehow appropriate them and change them. But what also changed is that today the idea of world building has become much easier in terms of making one's own video games because obviously the game engines are available. And at the moment, Rebecca, when you started, the game engines were not available. They had to be built. It was a very complex project. So this morning, I was thinking, how are we going to make this transition from Utopia to world building? So I asked a couple of times ChatGPT, and the initial answers were not really good, so I said, let's try harder. And then we ended up with a list of actually 6 points. 6 points how, in a way, Utopia and video games maybe connect through world building and imagination, ethical and moral dimension, social critique and commentary, simulation and experimentation, community and collaboration, narrative and storytelling. I think all aspects we can find in both of your work with video games. So maybe we start with Rebecca. I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about this aspect of world building. And we showed, of course, your pioneering work, The Bush Soul from 1999, which is so formative for many artists. Ian Cheng, an artist who works a lot with intersections of art, technology, video games, talked about it. Can you speak a little bit about world building and maybe concretely about Bush Soul?
Yes, it's funny. Things like world building or video games, to me, came about basically, I think, with the technologies, when the computers could be fast enough to render frames that we could interact with the image, then we had things like games and the whole notion of world building. But as I was moving through my artistic exploration, I knew that computers were getting to that point. Video games were starting to be more important in society. And I actually, even though it's funny we use this term video games, because I'm actually not a big game player. So world building is good. I joined a video game company. I was a complete misfit, but they hired me as my title was 3D visionary, because the games had to, at that time in the early 90s, move from two-dimensional worlds to three-dimensional worlds that most games are now. But it was also the time the big game, that three-dimensional game, was Doom, and the first-person shooter is a whole category of games where your goal is to go and kill and destroy everything. So I worked in a game at Virgin just to learn what I could about making games, but then I was able to make the kind of experience that I wanted to. As Hans Ulrich mentioned, we had to first build a game engine. Nothing was existing yet, but I was working with another area that I've spent a lot of time with, which is a part of AI, artificial intelligence. It's called artificial life, A-life. And what it is instead of worrying about the cognition and intelligence of the machine, it's learning to simulate behaviors and very complex emergent systems. That made sense to me as far as building this world. The first virtual world I did, this piece called The Bush Soul, I'll just explain a little bit. Some of the questions I asked is, okay, we're all going to be entering these virtual worlds. And again, like, where's our body? There's no real role for our body, except maybe, we can press some buttons and things. But I had been working with artificial life programs, which basically allowed you to define the personalities and behaviors of in my case, these abstract forms. And then as an artist, you do that and you set them to life in these virtual worlds. So the way I was first thinking of world building and entering video game kind of worlds is to bring this whole world of artificial life to life. And you as the human, the player, the one who experiences it, you are the only human in this world. It's full of artificial life. And you aren't allowed to either destroy things or even build things like so many games were. It was thinking of a world full of virtual life that is very little controlled by humans. So you enter this world. I actually used a joystick of that time, and it's what's called a haptic joystick. So my way of including the body is to enter this world and just explore it. You watch, you observe the virtual life going on. You can try to interact with certain life forms. Some don't like you, some love you, some run away from you. But you're exploring it through your hand movement, your body movement. There's certain places in the world that are, like a lot of cultures have a special energy. And the way you know you're there is you start to feel this haptic feedback. So it's only through your touch that you learn more about these virtual worlds. Again, my way of trying to keep the physical body as part of the virtual world. And then I felt like with this experience, you could get to know another life form. And more and more, we have to get to know these artificial life forms. We're living more and more with them. But to try to think about them like they have their world, we are entering their world. The piece was called The Bush Soul because it was reflecting on West African beliefs that we have multiple souls. We have a soul in our body. We have a shadow soul, but there's a feeling you have a soul that lives in a wild animal in the bush, in the jungle. So the feeling was that you're entering this jungle, this virtual bush soul world, and at times you go inside these artificial life creatures, and then you see the world and experience the world through their perspective. So it was playing with the whole notion, since your physical body isn't there, you have this little form that's your soul, and you're navigating your soul. And it was trying to take everything that video games were doing at that time, and unfortunately are still doing, away from the, kill and win and destroy and build, but think of, we're just gonna, as a human, enter this virtual world and learn from the life forms that are already living there. And that's kind of the gist of the piece.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And we met actually a couple of years ago, really initially thanks to Kay Watson, who heads our technology department at the Serpentine, but then also through so many artists whom you taught. Many of you will see later on the work of Refik Anadol here in the entrance of the art fair. Refik is a student, as I mentioned already, Ian Cheng. There's so many artists whom Rebecca taught, generations of artists. And that leads us actually, in terms of the Serpentine, I wanted to talk a little bit about the work we're doing, because in the last 12 years, technology, science and art, the bringing together of that has played a very big role, because we started 12, 13 years ago with this department, initially with Ben Vickers, and have today a whole team with 5 curators. We want to do new experiments in art and technology, create infrastructure, not only for the Serpentine, but for the sector. We want it to be a utility for the sector. And that, of course, allows us also to produce work, not only to exhibit, but produce work. For example, the world-building project of Gabriel Massan, which happened last year, which was then went very much viral also because not only through the exhibition, but also by Madonna picking it up and getting inspired by it and inviting Gabriel to be part of her show and concert tour. So the idea, of producing work, of being a utility for the sector, and doing this is a very long-term project. As a part of this research, through our curator, Tamara Clark-Brown, I met some years ago Danielle, and we've had amazing conversations and collaborations ever since. And world building came up often in this context, of the exhibition, of course, in Düsseldorf, but in all our conversations. And you once said for our questionnaire, actually, for Düsseldorf, Danielle, that you think that building worlds digitally gives you the chance to think about the foundation that you are constructing on. Here the quote: "I often build on top of the words, images, videos, and sounds of Black trans people to ensure that their history is the foundation of the world. I'm building so that it would be able to hold the stories they want to tell, the crafted environments, levels that are designed to serve the narrative you have. These worlds allow you to create systems and simulations that allow you to try and come up with alternative solutions to real-world systems. Letting these simulations play out in the games often give you a result that cannot be predicted, showing the gaps within your understanding and desire to craft a world that can hold those who are designed for it." Can you tell us more about this idea of world building?
Yeah, hi again. So one thing that I feel that is very important to start with is that although we're building a world, and we spoke a little bit about this before, we're building a world in the digital world, it comes from reality. And often, sometimes we lose sight of that, is that reality is what is kind of, at least for my practice, reflected in the work I build. So a lot of the time, I'm trying to make work that is archiving, particularly my community, which is Black trans people, but also the soul. Like, I feel that often when I see a lot of 3D design work, it's extremely beautiful, it's very shiny, you have the best graphics, the best thing, you can kind of let it wash over you, but it sometimes can be soulless. And I feel like it's very important to embed a soul within these digital worlds and have a reason that it exists, not just for it to be entertainment, that something is gorgeous to look at and you want to reach out and touch this beautiful 3D ball that has 10 billion triangles, but also that has a point that's there. And so a lot of the time, the reason I'm using game engines is because you can answer a question in a game engine that's really hard to answer. So I built this game called Pirating Blackness, where you have to decide who your ancestors are. So at the beginning, you decide if your ancestors took someone across the sea or were carried across the sea. And depending on that, it determines the entire story that you will see and unfold in front of you. And I feel that games can offer a chance for you to choose a choice that actually makes you have a lump in your throat and get scared about the repercussions that you're going to see later, especially if you're in an environment where everyone is watching you. And I feel that something that's missing in a lot of art worlds is that sometimes you can just look at a pretty picture and say, God, this is so beautiful, I'm going to buy this. Yeah, I'm going to spend my 10,000 pounds on this or whatever. Or you're going to say like, oh, this is so gorgeous, it makes me feel of like happy nostalgia. But when you have a game, it doesn't progress without you. You are literally the driving force of the piece of art. If you don't do anything, the art does not exist. How hard you try will determine what you see. And for me, that's a really important point to keep hammering on in art, is that you continuously need to act and you continuously need to put effort in an environment, in worlds that you want to see. And so for me, I've come from a very particular kind of community. I grew up on the burlesque scene in London. That was my world. That was the way we made money. That was my first access to art. It was not about a market of pretty images. It was about making day-to-day living. And so for me, when I think about a world building, I try and think about a world for the people that allowed me to live and how I can archive them within an environment, within a game, within a system that you're seeing. And the next level is how your choices then affect you and what you leave with. Because I think that a lot of my games are not kind to the audience. And so I did a recent game called The Rebirthing Room, which made you go in and fight for something that you're struggling with. So it could be addiction, self-loathing, all of these kind of things. And so you would pick one of these things and you would try and fight to overcome your idea of self-loathing or your addiction. And so for me, that kind of teetered the games into a set of, you brought the world and I gave you the space to have a little bit of therapy. And maybe you didn't care about it, and maybe you did, depending on who. The feelings were very different, but I feel that that gives the artwork and the environment a bigger place than a piece of entertainment. And I think that that's what we really need to push towards, especially in our world, is that art should be a place where you can kind of come and have varying sets of opinions and get really deep into the dialogue with either yourself or everyone in the room. And you may leave thinking the same thing, or you may leave having a bunch of questions, but you shouldn't leave saying that's beautiful. If you're leaving an art installation saying that's beautiful, it's done nothing. And I know that's really tough, but it has done nothing for you apart from be a flower in front of you. If you're leaving an art institution and you think, I think I'm wrong, that's better. If you're leaving an art institution saying, I need to have this conversation with my parents, that's way better. If you're leaving an art institution saying, I need to step up and invest in X, Y, Z, that's way, way, way better. But I think today, when you're looking around, if you leave and you say that's beautiful, you got to tell Art Basel, hey, you're not doing enough. Because everything is gorgeous, and I'm bored. Because everything is always gorgeous. We don't want to live in a gorgeous world. We want to live in a world that actually makes us do things, and this is literally the perfect format to do that. Why the hell not? Let's do that. So for me, that's well off topic, but for me, I feel that, today when you're walking around, because I'm all about you really, I don't really care about myself, when you're walking around, if you do not think the art is doing anything for you apart from being beautiful and making you say, wow, you should say, do better, and you should let everyone know, actually, we need more. Of course, I'm not saying the beautiful art is not good. Beautiful art is great. I love lots of beautiful art, but we have lots of beautiful art. Let's have some art that is, your face, sorry. Let's have some art that is a little bit more challenging and maybe enabling us to have harder conversations within an environment that is safer to have those conversations in.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you.
Sorry.
And this really leads us directly to Carlo, because we have many conversations, Carlo, over the years about you really in your work as an architect and urbanist, creating engagement. You want to empower people. You actually started Senseable Cities because you don't like this idea of smart cities, and you once told me that, for you it's an idea of empowering people, of creating urbanism which empowers people. So I think we have a direct transition here, and I would be very curious to hear from you about world building in your work as an urbanist, also as the now artistic director of the next Architecture Biennale, and also, of course, I'm very curious about video games in architecture, because we made this very, very big research about visual artists and video games. But I hear, for example, from Joseph Grima the other day, the architecture critic and curator, that there starts to be a lot of conversations also in the architecture world about architects using world buildings and video games.
Yeah, no, thanks, Hans-Ulrich. And, usually conversation when we all agree are boring. And, but actually, I agree with what you said. I think, when you look at this kind of virtual world, the only meaning is that if they're anchored in reality, as you, Rebecca, were saying, they're anchored in ourselves, they actually change kind of the physical perception of how we live. And there is something that is very concerning for me when we look at the virtual side as kind of a utopia. And the point of the virtual side, we can get rid of all the things that are not beautiful. We lack that challenge, that tension that we have in physical space. When we meet here together, you all came here from all over the world. And you come here because by actually this kind of friction, human friction, then that's when you can actually, you find somebody who will challenge your preconceptions, you will be exposed to new things, and actually too easily in the virtual world, we can sanitize it, which is exactly what you were saying, Danielle. So you can sanitize it and you lack what makes you really think. And so physical space has something that you can call inevitability. There's something we want to explore next year, the Venice Biennale. The title of the Venice Biennale, I'm directing next year, the Architecture Biennale, is about intelligence, natural, artificial, and collective, especially facing in the face of some of the challenges like climate change we have. And then again, I think you should start from physical space. What we are saying all is that the virtual side can help us elaborate, but it should be always anchoring in the same reason we are all here today, which is actually to enjoy each other's company, but to challenge to find those challenges that are too easily removed in the digital space.
Thank you so much. And from there, I kind of wanted to go to the theme of collaboration, because in a way, collaboration plays a very central role in world building, and I think we live in a world where we need more togetherness, and we can only build worlds together, not alone. And I was kind of wondering if you can talk a little bit about collaboration, and it would be great to hear more about your ideas for the Venice Architecture Biennale.
Sure. Yes, we've been collaborating as architects for a long time. Got architects collaborating with engineers, maybe sociologists and so on. I think now we want to push the boundary next year really to the next level. And so we wanted all the projects, first of all, is about putting everybody on the same level. Traditionally, you got maybe the architect coordinating, orchestrating, getting feedback, but there's kind of a hierarchical structure. The question is, how can we actually do that more like a conversation we're having now amongst each other, the conversation we'll have in a moment with all of you. So having that as a more equal bottom-up collaboration, and going to the extreme, I think in some of the projects we're starting to put together for next year, you got architecture, you got science, you got complex science, you got sociology, you got disciplines that really at the same level can help us to do something more. The other thing that's important, I think, if you think about a biennale, the idea of a biennale to expose existing knowledge, art of architecture, is a bit outdated. There's so many different ways we can actually access that in an easier way online, in virtual space. But actually, how can we use it to create new knowledge? And again, here is where collaboration comes to play. So how can we take some of the challenges, and hopefully next year we'll look at how they can find different solutions. So I'd love that every project next year is not only something new, in its own right is maybe the equivalent of a new scientific paper, a new piece of knowledge that can actually enrich all of us.
Thank you. And Rebecca, for you, collaboration also plays an integral part of your work. Most famously, maybe the album art for Kraftwerk, the '86 album Electric Café, where you created these incredibly famous 3D models of the band members' head, a really prescient and visionary work. And they also featured actually Nam June Paik's installation, no? Fin du siècle. And then, of course, collaborations with Peter Gabriel, Carter Burwell, Twyla Tharp. There's lots of collaborations with Twyla. Can you speak a little bit about collaboration in your work and in your world building with musicians and different practitioners?
Yeah. Well, when I made a decision early in my art career to work with time-based art, it meant that something is happening over time, and I had to think about the sound. Either it would be silent purposefully, or there would be some kind of sound. And sound, when you add sound, it has such an impact on the visuals. So it led me to discover certain musicians that were visual, but also working with new kind of sound, electronic sound. Really, when I started, I started in 1974, but when I was trying to get my work out, the art world just did not want to know about computers at all in any relationship to art. So when music videos started to appear in the early 1980s, I was still working. The only way to do this kind of work was in a laboratory, and I was working at this top lab called Computer Graphics Lab, and we were inventing all the software that everything uses now for modeling, and it was like being in the Renaissance. You discovered, these scientists I work with, how does transparency work? How does light hit surfaces? How do you define surfaces? It was really exciting to be in this very scientific, technical world, but as an artist and re-seeing the world, the virtual world, and inventing the virtual world. But once I started with music videos, I actually, the first music video, I worked with Lynn Goldsmith and Island Records, a strange song. I made it, and it was very popular. I made it another, and I thought, okay, this, as an artist, this is a way to be seen. It's got a huge distribution, even though it's in this strange music video format. But to me, it was short experimental films. Then eventually, Kraftwerk knew about my lab and the work I had done, because you mentioned Twyla Tharp too. My first interest in working with the computer from the very beginning was putting the body in the computer and putting humanity in a way in the computer. Because I sensed in the 70s, I thought, we're well, I was interested in the body, also being a woman. Being a woman artist in tech was a very unusual position. And I wanted to, at that time, all the models in the computer were just geometric forms, very mathematical looking. And it's like, I want to bring humanity in there and the body there. So I worked on a very hard problem at the time, is just to get, I think some of the slides will show early work of trying to get a figure, a three-dimensional model to move. I actually worked with the very first 3D model of a female. It was modeled by Ed Catmull, who went on to found Pixar, brilliant thinker in computer graphics. So he made this frozen model, and my goal was to bring her to life. And the fact that it was female is like perfect. So you'll see, like, early work was just to get her to walk up the stairs, but like, unlike Duchamp, nude descending the stair, where the woman's the nude, and I wanted the woman to ascend the stairs, like to go and to become more realized. And that was driving me, and by doing human motion, I worked with Joffrey Ballet early, and then Twyla Tharp saw some of the work I did, and I worked on a piece called The Catherine Wheel. It's a 90-minute dance piece that my character was Saint Catherine. I mean, from the very beginning when I worked with the human form, people would ask, oh, good, we can replace the actors. It's always about replacing the humans when you talk about technology. And I'm like, no, it's easier to film the actors and modify the image or whatever. But once I got her to move and come alive, she represented Saint Catherine in this dance piece. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. A saint is like a superhuman, kind of ephemeral figure. And in the Catherine Wheel, which actually there's examples there, she's leading the dancers, teaching them to live and to dance. So it was a great first use. This is the first time with this piece that a computer figure was ever seen on television. And I thought, this is great. It's an art piece. It's not a commercial. There was another commercial later called Sexy Robots. You know, it's like, oh, so typical. So I was really excited that this could be seen on television in a dance piece. So it naturally aligned me with certain choreographers who are also creatively thinking about movement of the body. The piece I talked about, the Bush Soul, the music, the ambient music was created by my friend Mark Mothersbaugh, who leads the group Devo, if any of you know them. But, you know, again, really experimental type of musicians. With Kraftwerk, I'm the only woman who ever entered their secret studio, I found out, which was funny. And they were saying, and I said, I'm going to build virtual, we're just doing something on television. It doesn't need to be a robot. I'm going to build virtual forms, your face, and I'm going to figure out how to express and bring your forms to life. Because I was always in a research lab, and I always had to justify with some research problem. We were doing the earliest, not only moving the human body, but an even harder problem, trying to express, use technology to express. So this was a great project for me in a number of ways, working with music artists that were trying to create a digital aesthetic for music, and I was trying to do the same as a visual artist. Even once Florian from Kraftwerk, he's like, well, you're creating virtual images of us, so we're going to create your voice. So my voice is the music nonstop in the song. So it was a true collaboration where we were both really inspiring and motivating each other in how to put these two things together.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And Danielle, in our conversation is also collaboration.
So cool, sorry.
Yeah, a round of applause.
Well.
Yeah, and Danielle, in your work, collaboration also plays a very big role, and so many examples. I don't even know where to start, but maybe one example is your collaboration with musicians, and then for a piece, She Keeps Me Damn Alive. You collaborated with Mariki's Cry, 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 and Eben so wieder, that's an example. Can you talk about your many collaborations?
Yeah, so usually, well, I just have to say it before, like, you're such a pioneer. It's so amazing. I cannot wait to see a biopic just on your life. It's going to be so amazing just to see everything that you've... Every time I hear you talk, I learn something that you were there at the genesis of. So that's just amazing. I just wanted to say that. That's awesome. But for me, every project starts with the idea of an archive. So wanting to archive someone and wanting to keep the existence surviving. So I think the first work I ever made was called Black Trans Archive, because I looked into the archive and there were no black trans people. There was one called Mary Jones, and there was a poster made of her in 1836, and they called her the man monster. And so like the only kind of archival image of a black trans person was this poster warning you away from her and saying she's a terrible man monster, stay away from her. And then we had the court documents of her speaking in court, but we don't have any first-hand accounts of her really just in her day-to-day life. And so for me, the first collaboration was with the black trans community in trying to find a way to archive us in a way that wouldn't then erase us from the archives again. And the best way we found that was to actually create this video game, which can be accessed at blacktransarchive.com. And instead of focusing on a very normal kind of archiving way, it was actually allowing us to write fictional stories and having those completely animated and then put online for anyone to access really easily. And then you can kind of play through it just by pressing 1, 2, 3. Because I don't know if you've ever used an online archive, unless you really know what you're looking for, sometimes they can be hard to navigate because they're massive. And the file systems can be quite different. And so the whole aim of this one was to collaborate with, I think it was about 12 different black trans people, none of which who had ever been archived before, none of which who had ever been in a video game, knew about making a video game, knew about writing stories, and trying to figure out how we would make a black trans archive. And most of the questions that you come across in that archive were made from the conversations with each other about what happens if someone who's not black and trans enters this? What happens if someone doesn't like you? What happens, blah, blah, blah. And we made a bunch of questions which then would be used to navigate the world. And everything usually starts from that. So She Keeps You Damn Alive was about a game, it was kind of about gun violence, because I tested the most accessible controller, and who would have guessed that the most accessible controller was a gun? And everyone knew how to complete an entire level with a gun. Everyone knew what to do instantly. I didn't have to say a thing. Everyone could pick up the gun, shoot the screen, and complete the whole level in, what was it called? It was A Dawn of the Dead. Oh, make my mic bigger. Hello. And so, sorry. And so that kind of scared me, because video games have a history of also being used to train armies, also being used to promote certain armies. Call of Duty is very good at that. When I was younger in school, actually the Xbox controller was used in the advertisements of the British Army to kind of cross-generation. This thing of Call of Duty was very popular, and the same controller of the most popular video game system, the Xbox 360, can also be used in the army to control drones. So there's a big cross between. Also, like one of the first Total Doom mod conversions was a SWAT conversion used by the US Army to try and train SWAT teams, and this happens still now to this day. Even the US Army actually funded, I think it's called American Army, completely funded by the US government to promote the American Army. And so when I saw that the gun was the most accessible kind of controller, I wanted to make a game that talked about the desire to cause violence in a game, and at the same time find a way we could archive the people, Marika's Cry and Eben Sadipo. And so they gave me 2 hours of them dancing, and we used AI to take that movement and put it in the game and make everything from the ocean to the sky to everything moving from that motion. So the entire environment was an archive of the movement, not necessarily recognizable, but just in data, just in the way the data was. And then your aim was to shoot to protect black trans people, and everyone looks like a monster. And so you never know who to shoot, and the whole point is that if you have a weapon and you're trying to use it to defend someone that you care about, often you may harm someone that you you don't want to harm, because you don't know how to use these weapons, and they can be used in any which way. And more often than not, collaboration is just the whole foundation of the practice. It's about building towards something. The final product isn't really the antithesis of it. It's the whole conversation that forms whatever you see. So sometimes the thing at the end is very vague and weird and strange and uncomfortable, usually uncomfortable, often uncomfortable. But everyone that was being paid, everyone that was working within there is a collaboration, not only in the fact of that they have these skills, but also in terms of it's a cross-community collaboration, making sure that the people that brought me and raised me up are also in there having the conversations when it comes to things they don't understand, like tech, the video game engines, or the coding.
Thank you so much. And the archive notion is really super interesting, because the archive notion brings us also to another aspect I think I wanted to address as part of this theme, utopia, world building, art and technology, because of course the early kind of spirit of the internet had a lot to do with open source, had a lot to do with generosity. I spoke to Tim Berners-Lee. He invented the World Wide Web in '89 and said, this is for everyone. So, and I know that that's important for all of you. So maybe just very quickly, if anyone wants to say something about that. There is, of course, in design, there is Enzo Mari, who developed this through the autoprogettazione. Is there any comment on?
Sure. No, I think what you were saying reminds me of this kind of beautiful short story by Italo Calvino called The Memory of the World, which is almost like, think in the beginning, the initial dream, the initial utopia of the internet. But I think maybe that is what actually the connection, the link, that brings that utopia we are discussing today to the present. I think it seems to me the link and what we are getting to is kind of almost like a definition of utopia, which is rooted in the present and allows us to transform the present. And the archive is a way to do it, to let it evolve, but let it evolve step by step. The archive is the past, and the utopia is the kind of boundary that allows us to jump into the future. But talking about that, you talked about open source and so on. I think we only have like 5 minutes left. I think it would be great to hear some of the voices in the room. I think with this kind of open source and Somari type of approach, if there's any, you are the moderator.
No, we will definitely,
take your time,
I think we have 10 minutes. Is that okay? 10? Good. Then we do 5 minutes, my last question, and then we open it up. Because we do have an urgent last question, Carlo, as you know, which is the only recurrent question in all the conversations I do, which is the question of the unrealized project.
Yeah.
And it's, of course, in relation to today's topic, particularly relevant. We know more sometimes about architects' unrealized projects. We know very little about artists' unrealized projects. There can be many different types of unrealized projects, projects which are too big to be realized, too expensive, sometimes too time intense. Time can be a reason. There can be also competitions, public art competitions, or in architecture, of course, competitions which are not won, that can be unrealized. Censorship can be a reason for a project to be unrealized. Or as my friend, the late Doris Lessing, always said, it can also be a project we want to do and we don't dare to do. So that could be, self-censorship. So there can also just be a forgotten project. Sometimes there's a project we want to do and then forget about it. Can you tell us about one of your favorite unrealized projects? Maybe we start with Rebecca.
Okay. I don't have many unrealized ones for some reason, but as I've spent my whole career in these virtual worlds and creating them and inventing them, as I keep coming back, it's like, what are we doing in the world here? We're leaving nature, destroying it. We're, leaving our bodies because we're all supposed to live in the metaverse. So I'm always, people talk about the computer interface, and I mentioned I work with joystick, which gives you some feedback so it engages your body. I've worked with interfaces where you use your breath to navigate and to affect interactively these virtual worlds. But again, a breath is like the essence of our life. And one thing I'd like to do is do a project just with wind, where people can enter a space and feel, in a lot of my work, especially entering virtual worlds, I think of nature and that we're it's all disappearing, and then so I might in a VR piece try to put you in nature, a fairly realistic looking nature, and it's like, do you feel the same thing you feel when you go out into the woods and there's just this feeling in your whole body and self that changes when you go into nature? With the wind, I like that it's very conceptual, it's invisible, but to create the kind of different winds and breezes that so much affect your physical self. And, you know, it's a big engineering and practical problem, but to create that kind of sensation of simulating wind the same way you might feel about breezes and wind in nature.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
I've mentioned this one to you before, but for me it's one where I would collect a bunch of computers from different institutions, so like maybe from a police station, maybe from different governments, and then install a themed virus that would kill the computer over a series of months. And as the computer dies, it would like throw up different games and videos, and so you could come in and watch the games and videos kind of play whatever's happening at the time. But the important thing about the computers is that, this is why I think it's impossible, is that all the data should be on there. So the police computer should have the criminal data set, and so as that computer gets destroyed and erased, all that data is gone forever as well. I've no idea how the hell I would get any of these computers or if they'd let me get any of them. But yeah, the idea is basically to destroy a load of this data that is used to control and silence a lot of people, while also at the same time you can visit and see it dying over a period of time.
Thank you so much, Carlo.
Well, answering if you know, I like to think of a project as what Umberto Eco used to say is opera aperta, is an open piece of work. And if you think about nature, we talked a lot about nature, you know, in the conversation today. You know, nature never has an ending state. Nature keeps on evolving and going from one state to the other. So by that definition, if you use the definition, each of our projects is an unrealized project because the project keeps on evolving. And my favorite one, going back to your point, would be those projects that for me are magic, that become self-fulfilling prophecies, where the sheer idea that you throw out there, maybe a competition or something else, then can somehow snowball. So it makes it a realization. So again, it's self-fulfilling project. And again, you know, we got a number of them, but I would say every project we do is unfinished. Every project we do is something that's unrealized because there's not a final state. It's something that will continue, like in Umberto Eco's opera aperta, to evolve over time.
Thank you so much. We can now open it up for a few questions.
Ideas, thoughts? Yes? The antipode of utopia, the fact that it's not completed? Yeah. Well, I think it's great because like we were discussing before, yes, you know, utopia, we started by saying that utopia is terrifying, and it's terrifying precisely because it's ultimate, it's finished, it's completed, while actually life is constantly evolving. So yes, maybe yes.
Other question? Yeah, we've got a question here.
Speak up a little bit.
Oh, there's a...
For Rebecca.
Oh, there's a microphone for...
Microphone is coming.
Sorry. You say that we should accept that AI is here and look into it and learn from it. I think from an artist's point of view, it's something maybe that we can use a lot and learn from it. But overall, what do you think really that we can learn from AI that you think is positive, and what do you think that is negative about AI?
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with AI. My whole career has been looking at the cutting edge, what's next with technology, and seeing if it can help me in a new kind of art form. But something with AI, I mentioned a form of AI that I really love is the artificial life, where I'm just troubled about AI and its focus on intelligence and again, AI can do, you know, it's going to do amazing things in medicine and life and art, but it also, as we know, it may end humanity as we know it too. And so, artists working with AI, you know, I'm really torn about AI and its future, and why is it that think so much about it replacing us instead of enhancing us. So AI becomes, there was this idealism in the 70s and 80s as everything with technology was being formed and invented. But now it feels like once it became a big corporations, it's just about making money and replacing us, and AI inevitably is going to do a lot of damage. So I'm really torn as an artist. I'm not really that attracted with working specifically with AI. I go more for behavior. I think we should pay a lot more attention to our behaviors than our intelligence, and simulating behaviors and understanding how relationships and behaviors work or don't work through the computer.
We can take one last question.
Yes, hello. Rebecca, you were speaking before about the game as a space for encountering non-human others as opposed to building, destroying, winning, etc. And I'm curious to hear, maybe from all of you, what would be some strategies for structuring an ambient kind of game to introduce a utopian quiver, so to speak, if that's the intention?
Yeah, that was the goal of the piece that I developed with a team called the Bush Soul. It was to explore that, to say, what if you can't destroy or make your imprint into this virtual world, the way humans are so used to doing, where the tech guys are so excited to go to Mars and wreck it and whatever. But it was, since we had to build our own game engine, because game engines didn't exist like Unity, if some of you know that, I could structure the game engine in a way that would bring about different kinds of experiences by adding this whole layer of artificial life. I mean, at that time, there was nothing like that in games, but to create these life forms that we could try to learn from and get to know and figure out how to live in this virtual world with these other life forms. It really had to do from the very beginning of the structure of the game engine, and then this whole artificial life system layer on top of it, the idea of the interface, everything was towards this goal of like, can we come up with a different alternative where games have inevitably gone, and sadly, the majority of games. And what else can we do besides win or lose or build or destroy? Can we learn? Can we understand these characters? Can we be part of them? Can we enter in their bodies? So I could use that as a way to explore all of these different kinds of ideas.
Danielle and Carlo.
There's this amazing game called The Longing, which is all about tackling your own loneliness. And so the game takes 400 days to complete. And once you start the game, the time starts ticking down whether you're playing it or not. So you can either start it and never visit it again, or start tackling your loneliness by just being with this one character. There's no one to fight, there's nothing to do, you walk extremely slowly. And it's all about just encountering that feeling of loneliness and basically giving you time to contemplate and face it. And I think they have a really beautiful way which an ambient environment can be a way to tackle something very real. And so lots of people who have faced extreme loneliness have said this game has really helped them in actually confronting that loneliness and having some time to actually consider what it means to be alone, rather than just feeling alone.
No, I think all has been said. Thank you, Hans.
Thank you also so much. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Hans.
Carlo. And above all, also thank you all for your great participation. And another big round of applause for Rebecca, for Danielle, for Carlo.
And for Hans Ulrich for making it happen.
Thank you so much, Hans.
Thank you.